Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week we're talking about problem-solving EQ. So this is EQ for people who are maybe still developing their ear and aren't really going the artistic route of having a specific tone in mind and trying to fit it all together, but you're really just trying to make service happen in your church. So we're going to talk about 3 common problems EQ can help with, and we're also going to talk about a few things you should look at before you reach for the EQ knob. So let's hop right in. First thing we're going to talk about is unwanted low-end. So I'm talking into this microphone here, very scientific. Let's imagine that the low and high frequencies of my voice are in this range here. Well, this microphone can actually record things that are higher and in this case lower than what my voice can actually produce. And so this becomes a problem when you start picking up the low end of things like the bass amp behind you, the kick drum, the PA. And so that's where we can use a low cut to help us out with that. This will also help with things that like explosives. Explosive is when you say like a P or a B and it pops your microphone. So I'm gonna say that P and B. Here you can pop the microphone. And then also with cheaper microphones, you're going to get more explosives and you're also going to get more of what's called handling noise. So when you're actually holding the microphone, all that kind of stuff in the background will become more apparent with cheaper microphones, and a low cut can help out with that. So let's take a look here. We've got a EQ. This is a digital EQ in Logic Pro, but the same concepts are going to apply on basically any mixer you're going to have. If you're on an analog mixer, a low cut is usually going to either be on or off, and it's only going to be set at either 80 hertz or 100 hertz. For a digital mixer, you're going to have a variable high pass where you can actually sweep it up and down to get rid of what you don't want there. So we're going to simulate as if there is some low-end stuff happening behind me. So if you have earbuds on or a system with a subwoofer, you should hear a lot of rumble happening below my voice right now. And so what I'm going to do is if I look on here, when I'm talking, check 1 2 1 2 1 2, you can see right around here is where, let me turn this rumble off so you can see that better. When I'm just talking, you can see most of my voice, apart from when I say P's or B's, is happening in this mid 100 area right around here. So we're going to use that as our goal. So visually, we can crank this up to where we're just starting to kind of follow that curve there. So right now I've got this set at 126. If I start going higher, then I actually start pushing that curve higher and higher. And now I'm starting to sound really thin. So you want to make sure that you don't overdo this. So if you're using your ears, you can crank it up and then lower it down to the point to where you're not really hearing a lot of change anymore. And that's usually going to reside somewhere between 100 and at most 200 hertz. If you're going higher than that, then you might want to rethink some things. But again, it really depends on your mixer, the slope of the high cut and those kinds of things. So right now, we're going to have this at 126, and you can hear, so I got my rumble back on. This is with it off. So there's off, and then on, off, on. Here's rumble off. It's not a huge difference on my voice. Check 1 2 1 2 1 2 off, 1 2 1 2 1 2 on. But if I say something like this is off, peanut butter, and then on, peanut butter, off, popcorn, on, popcorn. Handling noise. So here's off and on, off and on. So that's a very useful thing. You're going to want to use that on your vocals especially, and anything that you don't want to be really prominent in the subs. So acoustic guitar, snare drum, overheads, anything that doesn't need to be really in the subs will be useful for you to use this on. All right, next let's talk about hiss. Now hiss or unwanted noises up in the higher register is usually going to be a product of bad signal to noise ratio. So I'm going to talk about that really quickly before we touch the EQ. So anytime you have, in this case, an acoustic guitar plugged into a DI, plugged into a cable that's maybe 200 feet long by the time it gets to your soundboard, and then your soundboard. Every single one of those elements adds some level of noise to it. And our goal is to have our signal, so our acoustic guitar, be more obvious than the noise that we're always going to have in there. So imagine you've got all this stuff and you've got a noise floor right here. Again, very scientific. And your acoustic guitarist, for whatever reason, has his or her acoustic set to like 25% volume. So your level is just above your noise. Well, when it gets to the soundboard is going to, your operator is going to set the gain to turn that up, and you're going to hear the acoustic guitar better, but you've also raised up the noise, and the noise is really apparent now. So let's say we're back here, and if you were to set your acoustic to, say, 75 or 100%, as long as you're not distorting anything, then your operator, your soundboard, only has to gain it up just a tiny bit, and your signal is still nice and hot and easy to hear, but you notice your noise is a lot lower because you have a better signal to noise ratio. So the first thing you need to do is check on that and get the best signal to noise ratio you can. So have a good instrument, good pickup on the acoustic guitar, good cable, good DI, good cable to the soundboard, good soundboard. And the more you can get all that stuff working out, the better your signal to noise ratio. But let's say that you've done all that and it's go time and there's nothing else you can do. You're going to have to use EQ. Well, there are 3 types of EQ you can use. Some of them are more blunt than others. So we're going to start by talking about our high cut here. So our high cut is just like our low cut. It's a means of lowering how much of the high frequencies are able to come out of that signal. So let's take a listen to that. Here is some hiss I'm just going to play in the background. Excuse me. Now, this is a very blunt tool. So you'll notice as I reduce this, I'm reducing the hiss, but now I'm starting to sound a little bit like I'm underwater. So this is a really good tool. Let me turn this off while I talk. It's a really good tool for things that are specifically low-end information. So a bass guitar, this might be okay on. A kick drum, this might be okay on. Bass synth, this might be okay on. But you don't necessarily want to use it too much if you're cutting into things like a vocal or an acoustic guitar, because you will start to affect the clarity. So you might be okay if it's just noise at the very, very top end, but as you go further down, you can hear it starting to negatively affect my voice. So you need to be very careful of that. Now, a more even sounding option would be a high shelf. Now, a high shelf is kind of like the treble knob in your car. So it's called a shelf because it kind of flattens out and goes across all the way up your high end, and it gives you more even cut than a high cut does. So here again, here's our hiss. Excuse me. I'm going to drop down my high cut, and I can play around with the frequency. And my goal is to try and reduce the hiss, but I'm having a more even effect on the hiss and my voice than I did with my high cut. So that's the high cut. It's cutting out a lot of the good stuff. Or here's a high shelf where it's kind of more even sounding across the top. Now, neither of these are super good for, let me turn this off while I'm talking. Neither of these are great when you have, again, high-end information that you need to maintain. So a third option would be to use a parametric EQ. Parametric just means that it can go in 3 different directions. So we've got gain up and down, we've got frequency, high and low, and then when you set those, you have a Q or width control where you can make it wider or narrower to try and just affect a certain band of frequencies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I call seek and destroy. So I'll play that hiss again. I'm going to turn up the EQ and try and find where the hiss is most prevalent or most bothersome to my ears, and then drop it down and then try to make it as narrow as I can to only affect the hiss that I don't want, and try to have the least amount of effect on the signal, my voice, that I do want to have in there. So again, here's our hiss. Excuse me. And so like I find it most bothersome around there. So I'm going to drop that down. Kind of play with the width a little bit. I'm just doing this all very quickly. So that is reducing the hiss a little bit, and it's affecting my voice, but again, not as much as the other options. So here's before, check 1 2 1 2, and after, check 1 2 1 2. So you still lose a little bit of clarity in my voice, but you're not losing all the air of the room like you would with a high cut. So it's the least damaging of the three options. Finally, let's talk about feedback. Now, this is a tricky subject because there's a lot of things that can cause feedback, and you need to try to focus on the physics of feedback before you start reaching for the EQ, because you'll get more natural sounding results. So first off, feedback happens when you create a feedback loop. So you can't see them in the picture right now, but there are two speakers pointed directly at me, and I've got the microphone kind of angled up a little bit to kind of pick up the sound of those speakers. So when I turn those on, what's going to happen is the sound of my voice goes through the microphone, out the speakers. Speakers are loud enough to where they're picking up back on the microphone, through speakers, microphone, speakers, and it creates this loop that results in a whine sound that's really bright and annoying. Sometimes you can also get low-end feedback on like a kick drum mic. It's bad for your hearing, it's bad for your speakers, and it's bad for the vibe of your service that you're trying to do. So the first thing you need to do is try to break that loop up as much as possible. And a few things you should look at again before you hit your EQ. One is going to be proximity to the speakers. So if my microphone is out in front of the PA and where the speakers converge sound-wise is hitting my microphone, well, I'm setting myself up for failure. So if you can be behind the speakers or have the speakers out in front of you, same difference depending on your system, that will greatly help to reduce feedback. If you have stage monitors, there are what's called null points. You can check out a video on that where you can try to angle the stage monitor so that they're not picking up in the microphone very much. Or better yet, you can use in-ear monitors like I'm wearing right now. So I've got my voice nice and loud in my ears, but because it's not picking up in the microphone, I'm not creating a feedback loop, and I can hear myself fine and not have to worry about that. Next, you have to worry about what kind of microphone are you using. So in this example, I'm using one of the better options for what I need to do, which is a cardioid microphone. So it mostly picks up just right out in front. And I'm using a dynamic microphone, so it's not so sensitive that it's going to feed back super easy. So you need to make sure you're picking a microphone that's going to be appropriate for what you're trying to pick up. Again, you're trying to get the most signal to noise ratio. So placement. My microphone is very close to my mouth. If I was farther back, I would have to turn up the microphone more to pick me up more, and I'm therefore picking up more of the other stuff, the noise. So my signal to noise ratio is very bad in that case, and that's going to result in more potential feedback because it's going to start to pick up more the sound of the room and therefore the sound of the speakers, and then we're going to start to get into feedback area. So make sure that your speakers are placed correctly, your microphone is the right type of microphone and it's placed correctly, and that's going to greatly reduce your need for feedback or need for EQ to affect your feedback. Now, let's say you've done all that and you just happen to have an acoustic guitar that happens to be a type of wood that is very resonant and it's causing feedback, and it is what it is. You just have to roll the punches and do what you can to reduce feedback. Well, we're going to do that right now with this microphone. I'm going to turn it on in a moment. I'm going to do the exact same technique I just did of seek and destroy. So I'm going to take a parametric EQ here. You want to try and use one that is as close to the frequency of where this is feeding back. The more you do this, the more comfortable you'll be with finding that. But in my case, this can be kind of a high-end feedback, so I'm going to use a high mid EQ. I'm going to turn this up. My microphone is going to be just below the point of feedback. So I'm going to turn up the EQ, get it to where it's purposely feeding back. I'm going to do this very quickly, and I'll turn it down so it doesn't hurt your ears. And again, same thing in a live scenario. Be careful you don't hurt anybody's ears or your PA. I'm going to do it very quickly. You'll hear a little bit of feedback. You'll also see on the analyzer a spike that will happen where that feedback is most prevalent. And we're going to bring that down. We'll use our Q control to try and focus mostly on where that feedback is happening. Certain microphones are going to need a wider Q. Certain ones you can get away with a tighter Q. But our goal is to mostly affect where that microphone is sensitive and try to have the least effect on our signal, in this case, my voice. So let me, so I don't hurt my own ears, I'm going to turn off my earbuds and just turn on these speakers for a second here. Check, 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 check. All right. Check, check, check. So you hear when I say check. If you can hear that, it's just on the verge of feedback. There it is. And so what I'm going to do, I've got just below the point of feedback. It's feeding back on certain words, but it's not just on its own going off. I'm going to be very careful here. I'm going to boost this up. And see right there that around 5K. So right there, you saw it spiked right there. I'm going to drop that down. And here, all of a sudden, we've gotten rid of a lot of that issue. I'm going to, just while I'm talking, there we go. Check, 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 check. So again, before, after. Now, if you go too crazy with this, you'll start over-EQing and it'll start to sound unnatural. So you notice, like, if I were to crank this up even more, I would start to find other areas that are going to feed back. So you want to start with whatever is the most obvious that's going to attack there. And again, play with your width control to try and even that out. But my voice doesn't sound too crazy different. So here's before, check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2. After, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I think that actually sounds better in all ways. So again, quick recap. If we're having unwanted low end, we can use a low cut. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. And somewhere between 100 and at most 200, but usually 100 to like 150 would be a safe bet for you to kind of just get rid of that very, very bottom low end that you don't need in there. If you're having hiss issues, the most blunt tool would be a high cut. A more reasonable tool that's more musical sounding would be a high shelf. And then if it's a little bit lower and you're trying to just isolate that little bit of hiss, you can use a parametric EQ. You use a parametric EQ to try and isolate that and then use your width control to only focus on the hiss that you don't want. If you're having feedback issues, you can do the same thing. Try and find where your feedback is most prevalent, where your instrument is most sensitive, and then just work on that little bit there. If you have any suggestions or comments or things that you've done that have helped in this scenario, please feel free to leave them below. And until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.